Hello everyone, my name's Steve Drum. I'm a missionary with the Bourbon Day Catholic Missionaries, and I'm here in Rye-Gladesville Parish. And I'm about to talk a little bit about courage. This talk is part of three talks that are part of Pentecost for us here in this year. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what is courage and why is it so important as a gift of the Holy Spirit. The second talk will be by Sophia. It's talking a little bit her own experience of when the Holy Spirit came into her life and she had the courage to live in a different way. And then the third talk is a little bit about, from Ace and Rowena, it's going to talk about how to live with courage in our everyday life and going forward. And when I started thinking about courage, I was wondering how to connect this. And what came to me was actually a Kenny Rogers song. You know, Kenny Rogers actually passed away earlier this year, not so many months ago. And I'm not a big Kenny Rogers fan. I don't like country music so much, but my father is. And when I was growing up, we listened to a lot of his music, The Gambler and Lucille, many of them. And I remember one song always caught my attention, and it was called Coward of the County. I thought, it's an interesting song. It's a storytelling song. It talks about this guy called Tommy that everyone used to call the Coward of the County. He never used to fight, so everyone said that he always ran away, and they used to call him Yellow. And but he never used to fight things because he promised his father not to make the same mistakes that he made in his life on his deathbed. So when his father was dying, he promised him he would always walk away from trouble and he would turn the other cheek. Anyway, Tommy has a girlfriend or a wife called Becky, and one day the bad guys, the Gatlin boys, come calling round at Becky's house, and they mistreat her and abuse her in that moment. And obviously Tommy comes home, sees Becky there in a bad state, so he goes looking for the Gatlin boys. And when he walks into the bar, they all laugh at him and they think he's going to walk away, but then he turns around, locks the door, and then he deals out a bit of punishment for what they've done. And it says, when the last one falls, he said, this one's for Becky. Anyway, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, why not use this song and to give a little bit of a Christian explanation about what is courage. And you'll have to bear with me, but I was thinking we can use this, and I'll also be drawing on some of the thoughts of a German writer called Joseph Pieper, and he wrote a book about the 4 Cardinal Virtues, and we know that courage is one of them. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and then also about how Jesus talks about this when he says, "Do not be afraid, I have conquered the world," which is our theme for Pentecost this year, which is John 16:33. Anyway, so the first thing we can understand from this whole point of going to this song was that courage is a gift. Originally, we don't normally have a normal inclination to fight a danger. Like our normal inclination is to actually go back the other way from courage, which is actually to run away. And we can see this in the song. Tommy normally ran away from danger and tried to evade it, tried to go away from it. And Joseph Pieper, when he was talking about this, he defines courage as something as like a readiness to fight or to die in battle when danger comes up against us. And the normal position is to self-preservation, to look after our own life and to not try and fight in that way. So Jesus also points to this position as our normal position, is when he says, do not be afraid. He starts from there because he knows that that's our normal thing, is to be afraid actually when danger comes, when difficulties happen. So he's saying, do not be afraid. And we know that actually, so our normal position is to self-preserve or to run away, but with courage, it's a gift that helps us to actually go against our dangers and overcome them. Secondly, courage is only courage if it's done in line with the other virtues, the other 4 virtues. So we know there's 4 cardinal virtues. There's prudence, there's justice, there's courage or fortitude, and there's temperance. And a person is only courageous if he is also prudent and if he is also just. And then also temperance comes into it as well. But it's very important that courage is the 3rd virtue. So that order is important. So just the prudence is the first thing. So you have to be prudent to be courageous. To be prudent means that you can make a good decision. You can see the consequences of this act or not. And so courage without prudence is actually recklessness. It's throwing yourself into danger's way. And that's not actually a virtue. It's actually a problem. Whereas when you've got genuine prudence on your side, then you can have genuine courage. This is what Pieper says. Genuine courage presupposes a correct evaluation of things. So we look to resolve things in the best way, and then we act in a courageous way, with good judgment, with mercy, and looking with our common sense as well too. And we have to have a look that it also has to be in line with justice. So we actually have to have a just cause that we are being courageous for. So Thomas Aquinas says this as well too. He says, man does not expose his life to mortal danger except to maintain justice. It is when we have a fight for justice that we'll find out whether or not we are courageous or not. And we know this in our life, in the life of many things. For example, in World War II, it was a just cause that the people of Europe had to fight against Hitler and the Nazis, because the Hitler and the Nazis weren't listening to reason. They were trying to take over everyone. The only way that people could actually stop them was actually to stand up against them and fight against them. So both justice and prudence were on their side in that moment. And that's why they could be courageous to fight against it. It's the only way to stop them. So we see it in the hero of that song, to go back to that song. Tommy has those virtues actually. He was prudent. He didn't try and fight in any unnecessary ways. He actually tried to look away from it and go away from it. But when the Gatlin boys, the bad boys come, he actually knew that they hurt Becky, and then they also knew that they'd probably hurt other people as well too. So he had to act in that moment. So he acted on the side of prudence and on the side of justice in that moment. And Jesus himself as well too, when you look at that same passage that we're looking at, he also speaks of this too. He is saying that, be not afraid, because I have conquered the world. We're on his side. We're following his footsteps. So it's prudent to follow and not be afraid, because he has conquered the world. And it's also just because he's the one who's actually conquered the world. So we're on the side of good, on the side of Jesus, on God. Okay, thirdly, when we live out our courage, it's found in two basic reactions. That's how we live it. The first way is endurance, and the second way is in attack. So some people think that it's only when people are courageous when they do a courageous deed, or they act in a very courageous manner, do something very brave. But also endurance in itself is also something very brave. It's very courageous. The first way of endurance is like understanding courageous patience, for example. When we are patient with people, when we overcome the danger by going ahead and living as we should, despite all the obstacles we come up against. That is when we are living as just and courageous people according to the will of Jesus in the same way. The second way is not to be aggressive, but there is moments when we have to take on our dangers head on. So we actually have to be courageous in that moment in our actions and really attack the danger, not run away from it. So Jesus asks us to be courageous because he has conquered the world. So he's the one who's led that attack against evil, for example, and he's also endured the cross. So in both ways, we follow him when we be courageous. And I'll just say, just to finish, my only experience of trying to be courageous, I've had many experiences, but one that came to mind was when I first tried to become a missionary. I had to tell my boss that I was leaving being an engineer and becoming a missionary or a priest. And it wasn't a very easy thing for me. It was actually one of the most difficult moments, because I remember being outside his office trying to come up with the courage to try and tell him. I'd been working there for about 10 years, and I knew that I thought anyway that he probably wouldn't agree with my decision. They'd also, in that my work had invested a lot in me. They expected me to be the engineer there for a long time. They'd actually put me through university, paid all my fees. And so I had a lot of fear, not exactly fear, but I was worried about what he would say in that moment. But I remember walking in there, and when I did walk in there, I talked to him and I said straight away, I didn't have any other way to bring it up. So I said, look, I think I'm meant to be a priest. And then I remember him looking at me, and then he smiled, and in that moment he said, I'm surprised. But he said, I'm surprised that it took you so long, actually. And for me, it really caught my attention, actually, in terms of courage, especially when Jesus says, be not afraid, I've already conquered the world. That was what I understood in that moment. I was very scared of that, making that announcement, but he'd already knew, actually. He'd already prepared that. He'd already it was on his side. I was only following on his footsteps. I was only trying to do his will, and therefore God had my back in that moment. So when we be courageous, we've got to have this understanding that Jesus has already conquered the world. And that's why he gives us that power, that gift to be courageous. And this is what the Holy Spirit wants to give us this Pentecost. One of the many gifts that he can give us is to live in a different way and to trust that Jesus has already conquered the world, and that when we live in our way, when we try and help make the world a better place, when we be patient in our trials, when we be, when we attack in the sense of really going against what our fears, our struggles, we know that we've got the Holy Spirit on our side giving us that gift. So hopefully you have a chance to pray with that and to think a little bit about, are you courageous? Do you really see the courage being something that you really need this year? And to ask God to give you that gift, this Pentecost, if it's something that you really need.